Who are you? Isn't that the most fundamental question you could ask? How do you answer such a deep question? I believe you must go all the way back to the beginning, to Genesis. You see, if God creates, then you are a prized sculpture, a work of art. You're also a creator made in the image of a God who creates. But if all of this just happened through a series of cosmic accidents, then, well, doesn't that just make you an accident? Just looking for something interesting to attach your identity to? Wandering aimlessly while seeking pleasure and fulfillment? You see, correctly understanding the beginning matters. If you understand the beginning, you begin to understand the Creator who makes you who you are. But Genesis has fallen on bad times. I've met many people who've given up on God's explanation of creation as too primitive or limiting or not scientific enough. Today, I want to give you some reasons to trust the Genesis account of creation, and so doing, help you gain back some of your own precious identity. The first reason I want to give you to trust the Genesis account of creation is because the Genesis account correctly explains our past. You see, the idea that the universe has a beginning, that's from Genesis. The normal thinking was that everything that has always existed, it's like it's in steady state. Everything's just eternal. But the idea that the universe had a beginning, that's from Genesis. Genesis also describes light as the first of all creation. But this concept of light not being fundamental, it's not obvious. 5th and 6th century Hindus thought of light something like we think of atoms today. Very fundamental to everything, but always existing. Aristotle in the 5th century, his thinking was similar. He thought of everything as being created through 4 fundamental elements of air, water, earth, and fire, or light. But all of these 4 elements were always eternally existing. See, Genesis said everything was made, and it was man and his explanations that had gotten it wrong. The Genesis account also correctly explains the past relating to time. So our available evidence shows that the universe was created at a specific time. Well, the fact that the universe started at a certain time, this can only be explained by a personality or intelligence choosing this time versus another time. See, if you have an infinite mathematical understanding of the universe, you can't explain why the universe started when it did. All you're left with is a continuous cycle of construction followed by destruction. But the idea that the universe just started at a certain time requires a personality or an intelligence to intervene and start it. So we see the available evidence is exactly what we see when we see how the universe was started. The Genesis account of creation correctly explains the past in the record of life as well. When considering the fossil record, Stephen Jay Gould, a prominent archaeologist, has said the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as the trade secret of paleontology. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and at the nodes of the branches. The rest is inference, however reasonable, not the evidence of fossils. We also see what's called the Precambrian explosion in the fossil record. All the earliest forms of life just all of a sudden appear. There's no transitional elements, just a sudden onslaught of a large variety of animals. And this is consistent again with what Genesis tells us about creation. The second reason I want to give you to trust the Genesis account of creation is because the Genesis account fits perfectly with our modern observations. See, in a lot of ways, God has gifted us with Genesis. Modern observations show that time itself is relative. In other words, we can't measure time the way we think because it's relative to the observer. Genesis makes it clear to us that the earth and universe were created in 6 days, and on the 7th day that God rested. Well, that creation time is relative to the observer. Those 24-hour periods could be 24 hours of time from man's experience, but could be a vastly different amount of time from the perspective of God. We don't know if that's true or not, but we see that Genesis is not afraid to use time in a way that maybe wouldn't make sense to most people until our modern understanding of time. The Genesis account also fits our modern observations about what we call the Big Bang. We see the Big Bang requires a time when the laws of physics were different. At 10 to the minus 43 seconds from when the Big Bang occurred, when the universe began, there's no physics. In other words, it's a dirty little secret of physics, but when the universe is created, there's no light, there's no speed of light, there's no time, there's no distance. There's no such thing. The rate of the expansion can be near infinite, and it only takes 10 to the minus 43 seconds for the entire universe to spread out. So then if you try to apply steady state physics all the way back, which again is a dirty little secret because you can't apply steady state physics all the way back. We already know there's a time when there were no physics. You realize that, hey, Genesis actually describes something that's very possible in the time frames that are given. God makes it very clear that in 6 days God worked. What was he doing? Well, perhaps he was bending the laws of physics on each of those days. Maybe he bent the laws of physics so that life itself could exist. But now we're living in the 7th day when all the laws of physics are steady state. Nothing's changing anymore. The third reason I want to give you to trust the Genesis account of creation is because the Genesis account explains everything. You see, it doesn't just explain the physical, it also explains the metaphysical. See, science by definition studies things that are observable and repeatable, but it can't really explain things like love, justice, sacrifice, friendship, communication, even consciousness. The fact that you and I are listening to each other, these are all ultimately meaningless to science. These are just means of survival, chemicals trying to stay together. But why are they even trying to survive? See, Genesis provides us an understanding that love is meaningful, justice is meaningful, sacrifice is meaningful. See, somehow deep inside we know that these things are real. These things are true. They're not just apparitions. Science can't explain these things, but Genesis makes it clear because a God who has these qualities created the universe that we see. So Genesis rings true in the metaphysical as well as the physical. Genesis offers us an explanation of everything. Okay, so I've given you 3 reasons to trust Genesis. 1, because Genesis correctly explains our past. 2, because Genesis fits our modern observations. And 3, because Genesis gives us an understanding of the physical as well as the metaphysical. Genesis explains everything. Psalm 139 says it perfectly. It says, I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. My soul knows it full well. I want to encourage you to write that down. Write Psalm 139 on a sticky tab and put it on your mirror. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. My soul knows it. And every time you read that sticky note on the mirror, remind yourself that God has given you a perfect and trustworthy account of everything. And remind yourself, because He's given you that perfect and trustworthy account and you know it full well, you can recognize your own identity a little bit clearer, a little bit better as one who's been created by this God who knows full well and He's created you full well. Let that speak into your identity. Genesis Rocks is a trusted, indispensable source of cutting-edge information regarding the Genesis account of creation. We've leveraged the latest in scientific analysis, the Word of God, and a deep understanding of philosophy and culture to equip you with the resources you need to fully explain and trust the Genesis account of creation. If you want to help your friends restore their identity, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and tell all your friends to subscribe now also.